Hey guys, this is SentZ here in Dubspot, New York. Today we're going to be talking about the Native Instruments Traktor Remix Decks and how you can start to use workflows in it that will work really well for the upcoming release of stems. I'm sure all the producers and DJs are thinking about this release now. So it's good to be able to start thinking of ways you can incorporate your own music or music that you have from other artists into that style of mixing. When Native Instruments announced the remix decks for Traktor, I was really excited. One of the things that kind of tripped me up at first was figuring out how to implement them into my standard workflow. So I decided to start borrowing techniques from the dub style of mixing and some techniques from glitch hop, and I use that when I'm setting up a remix deck. That process involves thinking of the 4 channels as different frequency ranges. So the first channel of clips that I have here are mainly low frequency content, bass, drum clips, rhythmic elements, things that'll maintain a groove in a song. And then as you go up to clips 2, 3, and 4, you start to work with content that has more high frequency texture in it. So string sounds, pad sounds, vocals are really great in these channels. And by doing this, you don't end up having a bunch of records that clash on top of each other. Now, part of that, stems from how you select the loops that you're playing with, but you have the option of using filters to reinforce that point. So in channel 2, I usually tilt this filter a bit forward, and in each of the other channels, I incrementally raise that value. And what you're basically doing is rolling off the low end on those channels. So everything coming out of channels 2, 3, and 4 will basically be free of the bass that's being defined by that first track. I'm first going to play everything at once without any of the filtering added in, just so you can hear what these things sound like as they're clashing. So we've got a drum loop on this first clip. Introduce that second clip, and you already hear there's a lot of bass frequency in there too. Add this third one. Okay, so we have all of these tracks locked. They're going to loop infinitely because of how the remix decks work. But since there's so much bass in the mix, it's a bit clashed. So as you start to use the filters, you can roll off that bass and level things out a bit. This gives you a stronger backbeat to work with. And then it also opens you up to using effects on that backbeat to then make a variation of the pattern. So on the F1, I've disabled the effects on channels 3 and 4. They're only enabled on these first 2 decks. And then I'll use the beat masher to add a different rhythmic quality to the drum pattern. So when talking about low clips versus high clips and how to work with those frequencies, we go back to looking at dub mixing, and when you look at the high frequency stuff, that's where you really get to play with things like delay and reverb and spatial based effects. When you start to use delay and reverb, you can open up the room a bit, and it starts to add a different texture to your performance that works really well in a live setting, especially when you're dealing with compressed files like we tend to be dealing with nowadays. So I'm going to run that same pattern. Okay. And in this instance, we're going to enable effects on decks 3 and 4. And I have a reverb and a delay chain added here. So I'm going to start to enable that so you can hear what that sounds like. And when dealing with a lot of reverb, in order to clear that out, you can actually use the channel mutes to stab these sounds in whenever I see fit. So by thinking of your channels in two sections, low sections and high sections, and then assigning a few effects to each group, you simplify your workflow. I think when you're doing live performance with a more complicated tool like a DAW, you might get lost in all of the options that you have available. But something that's nice about Traktor is the limitations that are there. You have all of these effects to choose from, but by having them limited into 3 or 6 cells and then only being able to operate a few of them at a time, I think you force yourself to think about what really works in this moment. And when you do that, you stop thinking about what you're doing and you start to perform. That's when you really get an engaging performance. So basically, I think of my content as two sides: a rhythmic side, which is that A and B section here, and then I think of it as a spatial or an effect side, this section here. So the melodies, things that are open, are things that get effects, while the rhythm is maintained by everything that's on A and B. I was able to introduce a most def clip that didn't break up the rhythm or didn't break up the tempo of what we were doing. And that workflow is similar to other DAWs that you might see. The key, the pitch, the tempo, everything that's in these cells gets locked, which allows you to also experiment with different genres. If you have a track that's 92 beats per minute, for example, and you want to bring in a house loop that's 128, you can do so, because as you trigger different clips, those tempos are always going to lock. I often like to use the remix decks at the start of a set because they give you a lot of clues as to where you should take the rest of your performance for the night. Being able to jump across different genres allows you to kind of gauge the crowd and see what genres they respond well to. So when you think about it, you have access to 64 different cells worth of genres or styles or ideas to play with really quickly. And you can go through a remix set really fast. So you can take that first couple of minutes of your performance and see what people really stick to, and then utilize the same performance and DJ tools you use in Traktor to dictate the rest of your set. I'll start this set with a loop that was originally a house record that's now brought down to 92 BPMs, and we'll start to layer songs over that and jump around to a few different genres. So with stems on the horizon, we're all thinking about how are we going to incorporate 4-deck DJing into our mixes. Using the remix decks right now is a good way to start practicing that process. You can already take your own content or other music and get yourself comfortable with working with 4 loops and effects at once, so that when it's more of a standard in the industry, you're prepared and you're pushing boundaries forward. So I hope you enjoyed watching and I hope you learned something. For more information on our DJ classes in New York, Los Angeles, and online, visit Dubspot.com. I'm SentZ. Thanks for watching.